Welcome back to a lifetime of Mafia tales. Today Sal and I talk about the fifth Mafia hitman he was very close with. The name of the hitman was Jimmy Burke, also known as Jimmy the Gent. Jimmy was a member of the very powerful Lucchese crime family crew under Paul Vario. Jimmy's close associates were Henry Hill and Tommy DeSimone. All these guys were the main mobsters in the movie Goodfellas. Sal talks about doing heists with Jimmy Burke and Jimmy helping him sell his stolen merchandise. Sal knew Jimmy for many years and watched him turn into a serial killer. Jimmy pulled off one of the biggest heists in history. The name of the heist was the Lanza Heist. This heist was portrayed in the movie Goodfellas. After the heist, Jimmy started killing off all of the criminals that helped him pull off the Lanza Heist. In the end, Jimmy would go to prison and die of cancer. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel if you want to get more videos like this. Also, please be sure to subscribe to our Patreon if you want to get exclusive content from Sal and I. And without further ado, let's get into Jimmy's story. One quick thing before we get started with this podcast. If you want to get our full podcast, please subscribe to our Patreon channel. Our Patreon channel link is in the video description below. All right, we're back, Sal. How you doing today, man?
Good.
Well, good. I'm excited for another episode. We're going to be talking about Jimmy Burke. He was in the Lucchese family under Paul Vario. There's a lot of information out there, man. And what I'll do is I'll give a background to everyone of who he was, where he grew up, and then I'll ask you where you fit in, and we'll just go in it from kind of like that. You know what I mean?
Okay.
Well, what I've looked up was that Jimmy Burke, he was involved with the Lufthansa heist. They got over $6 million. I mean, this movie about him, he was one of the main characters in the Goodfellas, along with Tommy DeSimone, and then, of course, Henry Hill. But Jimmy was born in 1931 in the Bronx. It is said that his mother came over from Ireland. When he was 2 years old, she left him at an orphanage. And when he was 13 years old, one of his foster parents, his foster father, was driving and ended up crashing the car while trying to slap Jimmy. Did he ever talk about that to you?
Not that I knew of, no.
Okay. Well, eventually after that, the wife of the man just kept blaming him and abusing him, and until they took him to a new home. And after that, Jimmy eventually ended up with the Burke family in Queens, and they showed love, and that's where that's why he just changed his last name to that. I mean, that's kind of what I researched, but, he started to be a criminal at the age of 16 years old. He made up his mind that he was going to be a criminal. Jimmy got close to a teen also in that area by the name of Dominic Sarasone. Am I saying that right? Are you familiar with him?
I didn't know him.
Okay. Well, he was associate. I guess he was actually associate of the Colombo family is what they say. And they say he ran scams, and they eventually got busted making bad checks. And when the cops tried to flip Jimmy, he wouldn't say a word, and the mobsters like that. So Jimmy ended up doing 5 years for that crime. So that's kind of how he got his in with these guys. So he eventually came out of prison. He became a bricklayer. And then after that, he got involved with Paul Vario's crew through that same Dominic. And then Jimmy would do loan sharking businesses with money. He would do loan sharking businesses for Paul Vario. And this is how he worked his way up in that crew. So, I mean, did he ever mention anything to you about his upbringing?
Nah, he was the type of guy who didn't rehash the past. As I was introduced to him by Dominic. Dominic knew the Varios, the whole family. There was a whole group of Paulies and Peters and all kinds of Varios. And occasionally we would stop in Brooklyn at Paulie Vario's cab stand. That's what they had. And his brother Babe, I met his brother Babe. So the whole Vario crew was, a big Italian family, and everybody, worked in and around Paul Vario. And that's how I got to meet Vario. And then in 71, when we opened up Sinatra Club, it wasn't long that Jimmy came there, probably around Christmas time, I think. And that's how I got to meet him when he came into the Sinatra Club. But by that time, Cataldo had already taken me to Jimmy's place on Lefferts Boulevard. He had this Robert's Lounge.
Yeah.
It was a bar, and in the basement they had like a card room where they played cards, which Scorsese showed in the movie.
Yeah.
For me, I always thought that the Jimmy Burke character was subdued. I thought Jimmy Burke was bigger than life guy. He was full of energy. He was smart. He was street smart, and he knew every scam you could possibly be involved in illegally in and around the mob. But that's the Jimmy Burke that I met around Christmas '71. He came to our little Sinatra club.
Okay. And even an early Jimmy Burke, he was known to be not a serial killer in the beginning, but he was doing killings, and even like a personal one that he had done was for himself. That he had met his wife, and her ex-boyfriend wasn't leaving her alone about some situation. And what is documented from what I read was that he had chainsawed her ex after the day after they had gotten married, and got rid of the body. And I mean, that was kind of it after that. I mean, then just straight after the wedding, I mean, he was already doing some shady stuff. So I don't know if you ever heard that throughout time.
No, I never heard those early stories.
Yeah.
Like I said, the Jimmy I met was a heck of a gambler. He was a wheeler and a dealer. He always had stolen merchandise, which we call swag. And he had a group of guys who followed him. I mean, they really followed him around like he was the Pied Piper. And everybody knew about his reputation through Paulie Vario. So he was, again, protected by a mob guy, Vario.
Yeah, I mean, and even when he was getting involved with Vario and stuff, he was doing, hijackings. That was one of his big things. And, one thing that I wrote down, I believe this is what they say that he got his name was that, Jimmy the Gent, was that he would take these the driver's wallets, and then he would put in some money in there, $50, whatever, and then look at their license and say, hey, you know what? I got your address. I know exactly who you are. Don't say it was us. Have a good day, or something like that,
Yeah.
So they called him Jimmy the Gent. I mean, that's one way, and that's kind of creative. But, I mean, besides that, was he actually a gentleman to you? I mean, was he?
He was always, he was always pretty proper. He was respectful in every way. I mean, he wasn't just respectful to mob guys. He was respectful to everybody. That's how he conducted his life. Yeah. So whatever he did behind closed doors, I wasn't privileged to know, because I didn't get involved with him in crime until maybe mid 1972.
Yeah. And he would recruit one of your crime partners, Tommy DeSimone, and his crew, along with Henry Hill as well. So he was definitely a big factor in you and Tommy doing business, because he was able to, flip the merchandise, get rid of it wherever you need, store it, and all that. But I mean, and on top of that, I mean, he brought in your crime partner, Tommy DeSimone. I mean, so that's kind of what he did.
Yeah, I mean, from what I remember, when you first meet somebody, sometimes you'll meet people in a life. Like it happened in and around the mob 20, 30 years later in Hollywood. I met somebody, and then a couple of years later, I go, who introduced me? I forgot who introduced me to a such and such a person. Mm-hmm. So I didn't know a lot about Tommy. And I think Dominic knew a little bit more about Tommy through Paulie Vario and Jimmy. And then he just said to me, don't worry, he's okay. Let's see if you can get together with him, because, he was coming in the Sinatra Club. Paulie was coming in the Sinatra Club. And Paulie had a whole following of guys. I'm sorry, not Paulie, Jimmy. Jimmy had a whole following of guys out there at his place, Robert's Lounge, they called it, which was only a mile or two from the cargo area in JFK. I mean, they were very close to the airport there.
Well, and a funny story as well is when I read and researched was that Henry Hill and Tommy DeSimone, they had done that heist, the one where they had walked out with all that money, and they didn't even have to pull a gun or anything at anyone. So they just walked in there and they were able to take the money and go. But from what I did find out as well is that they had a woman go, and they had her meet up with like this head security guy, because he wouldn't take a bribe or nothing. So they found out he liked women, of course. So then they got a prostitute, had him go in like a steam bath with her or something like that. And I believe Henry went in there and made the keys, made a copy of them, brought them back. And then that's how they were able to walk into the airport heist and take the money out. But they kicked up money to Jimmy Burke. That's what I'm getting at. And that you brought up Robert's Lounge, and I believe this is the time around the time that he had bought Robert's Lounge with that money that he had gotten from that heist.
Well, one of the things I don't think that anybody really wrote about Jimmy was he was a master at convincing truck drivers, people in positions to give information, and he was a master at what we call give ups.
What's that?
A give up is when a truck driver decides to give up his truck. Instead of really getting heist, they make believe they were heisted, and this followed a lot of mob activities. Like years ago, I'll talk about like a diamond robbery heist that I was involved in. It was a give up. It was a plan. So Jimmy was a master at that. Many of those truck drivers just gave him the truck. They had to create a story. Oh yeah, I was hijacked by 3 black guys. I was hijacked by 3 Hispanic guys. When in fact they weren't even hijacked by the Italian guys. They just gave information to Jimmy. He took the truck, took those guys for a ride, gave them some hot dogs and a $50 bill, and then they went and reported a bogus report on the heist. So Jimmy was a master at that too. People didn't really mention that.
Well, I mean, it was portrayed in the movie Goodfellas. I mean,
Right.
I think Henry and Tommy DeSimone, they were at a restaurant and they had this guy. They just nodded at him, the truck
Right.
driver. You went in, and then they got it. They drove off, and he's like, "Hey, that black guy took my car. Call the cops. Call the
Right.
cops."
Exactly. Yeah.
So,
But Jimmy was good at setting that all up. I mean, it was always scams, and he trusted his wife. Her name was Mickey. He always trusted his wife. I mean, she was right there by his side. I didn't think Jimmy was a philanderer. I don't think he cheated on Mickey. That's just my opinion. I mean, he really cared about his wife. He cared about his kids. He had 2 sons, one named Frankie and one named Jesse. And they were named after Jesse James and Frank James. And they were badass kids because years later, I had met him in 71, 72. When he was in the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary, both his kids were barred from visiting the penitentiary because they would insult the hacks, curse at them, so they weren't allowed to visit their dad. And that was a funny story for us, how badass his kids were.
Yeah, I mean, you even worked with Jimmy's son as well, and then you give him a job.
Yeah, years later. I mean, after the 72, 73, 74 period, which I got involved with Jimmy, and he was great at setting up, a heist. And then he would take the truck. He would unload the truck. He had workers in a building that unloaded. Jimmy would have that merchandise. I don't care if it was 1,000 shirts or 4,000 coats from South America. He'd have it sold within a few hours. He had all the context to sell just about anything that was in a truck that was hijacked. So anytime we hijacked a truck, like in the middle of 72, 73, 74, he would take the truck and he'd take the merchandise. It wouldn't be much for us to do, but wait and see what kind of price we got.
Right. And I mean, with him as well, he had these warehouses set up to where he would be able to take the merchandise, stolen goods, whatever it was, and drop it off there, I believe. I mean, explain how he was able to use these warehouses.
Well, we would hijack the truck and we would know where that truck had to go. And Tommy and Foxy would drive the truck over to what we called the drop, a big building where you drive in. And I would take the driver or 2 drivers, depending if it was one. I would be with one other guy. So we had a 4-man team. I'd take them for a ride and I'd hold them out for 2 hours, take and put them in the back seat of a car and then stop, maybe get them coffee, a hot dog or a White Castle hamburger or something and treat them nice, not threaten them,
Yeah.
And then I would stop and call where Jimmy was located in the secret drop, the building where we dropped everything off. And they'd say, okay, give us another hour. Then I'll call back in an hour. I said, okay, you can let the guys go. I'd drive them out to a specific place, drop them off, tell them to walk away from me. I never threatened them at all. Didn't even threaten these guys. And gave them some money and said, hey, thanks a lot for being cooperative. not here to hurt you. We're here to get this merchandise. And that's how we did those hijackings, one after the other. It never really had any issues. We had some funny things that happened, you know. In 72, after we did a few hijackings, I guess it was May or June, the Godfather movie had come out. And, you know, the Italian guys, the mob, a lot of the word was, don't go see this movie. You know, we shouldn't recognize. They did a movie about the Italians and the Godfather and all that stuff. But Tommy and I and Foxy had already done a bunch of hijackings. Let's go see the movie. So we go to see the movie in Queens. It was a big theater, and after we go outside in front of the theater, there's hundreds of people milling around talking about the movie. And I looked at Tommy. I go, "What do you think?" He said, "Look at all those people." He said, "They love this Godfather movie." So I said, "So what?" A lot of people like movies. He said, No. He said, "They love the movie. If they love the movie, then they're going to love us for being in the mob." I go, "Tommy, you're smoking too many joints or something." You know, Foxy was laughing at him because he was a little bit, Tommy was always a little grandiose. Whether or not he was sniffing coke when I first met him, I don't know. A few years later, he was really abusing cocaine. So then we went to a bar. We had a few drinks. We're standing at this bar, sitting around, whatever. And I said, you know, we should do something, spontaneous and wild to celebrate the movie, The Godfather. And then Tommy says, what should we do? I said, let's go get that stolen car we got stashed. We'll go over to the Vario Bridge and we'll hijack the first red truck that comes over the bridge. So Foxy looked at me, he says, Ubats, which means, you know, Ubats was crazy in Italian. You are crazy, but that could be exciting. Let's go do it. So we go and we sit on the other side of the Brooklyn Bridge. I should say, actually, we sat on the Brooklyn Bridge side because it goes from Staten Island to Brooklyn, the Vario Bridge. And here comes this red truck. And I'm driving. Okay, so I'll cut this truck off. You guys jump out, you know, put the move on the truck driver, and we'll take the truck and we'll put him in this stolen car we got. I'll drive him around for a couple hours. And you guys call Jimmy and tell him we nailed the truck. And in those days, we had a saying for that. And the saying was, it wasn't a planned robbery. And then Foxy says, so you just want to take a stab. We took a stab at this truck. So they took the truck and called Jimmy and went to, you know, the designated spot to bring that 40-foot truck in. And I took the driver around the city of New York, you know, Long Island for a couple hours. After about 2 hours, I called where they were. They had a payphone in that building. And Foxy says, you better come here right away. Drop that guy off. Dump that driver and come to the drop. And I knew what the address was. I go to the drop and Jimmy's inside pacing up and down. What the hell are we going to do with this? I go, what's the problem? He's, look what you guys nailed. He brought me to the back of the truck. The truck was wide open. It was these big, huge rolls of carpet, commercial carpet. They were huge, though. They were like, you couldn't even put your arms around the, you know, the circumference of the rolls of carpet.
Right.
He said, this is commercial carpet, and it's going to the World Trade Center. Okay?
Damn.
And this was while they were building the Trade Center. I said, what are we going to do? So Jimmy says, we need a big dick. I go, what's a big dick? He said, it's a long stainless pole on a high-low. And on the high-low, you put this big stainless pole inside these rolls of carpet. You lift it up, and you get it off. He said, I'm going to try to find out if we could get a high-low who's got that long stainless steel pole. So after a couple hours, there was no way he could find anybody to get that specific high-low. He said, well, we're going to have to dump this stuff in the street. He says, probably $100,000 worth of commercial high-grade carpet. So we were laughing, and they got a driver to drive the thing maybe 10, 15 miles away from the Brooklyn warehouse. And we're riding in the truck, and then Foxy says, Ubats. You know, he would say, like, another fine fix. He'd put his hand up here. You got me into, like, Laurel and Hardy, fat and skinny, these guys that were comedians back in the 60s, you know. Another fine fix you got me into. Now we didn't have the dick. So that was a funny story. We laughed about it. We all went and had a few drinks and laughed. He said, "That's what you get for not planning a heist."
Yeah.
So it was a joke. Like we had to celebrate the movie.
Damn, man. No, I didn't even know that story. That is pretty funny because I
Yeah,
mean, he ended up just putting it in the street or by a warehouse and just
yeah,
leaving it there. And
we dumped it. Yeah,
yeah, I'm sure someone found it eventually, the feds or cops or
yeah,
whatever.
I'm sure. But Jimmy was great. On occasion, this was the early. I had like three different periods that I was involved with Jimmy. This was, like in the 72, 74 period when we did all those hijackings. And then we had information about an entire truckload of suede women's jackets coming from South America. And so we hijacked this truck in same old format. I took the driver or drivers, I don't remember, one or two drivers for a ride, and they took the merchandise and brought it to Jimmy. After about 2 hours, I called. I said, "Okay, drop off those guys, and then come to the drop. Come over to the place where the merchandise is." So I get over to where the merchandise is, and Jimmy had always called Dominic because I was officially with Dominic in the Columbus, so he had to contact Dominic, and then because of Foxy, Jimmy had to contact the Gotti group, Fatico,
Mm-hmm.
John Gotti's boss, because John Gotti wasn't made then. So they'd all be in this building. We're sitting around, looking. And Jimmy arranged to have a buyer give him a price. So I looked at these suede coats. They were really high class. They were like expensive. And I walked away with Dominic. I go, "What is he offering?" He said he's only offering like 55, 60,000. I go, "Dominic, these things, and how many pieces we got?" I forget, it was 3,000, 4,000. These things have got to be $100, $200 a piece. That was a lot of money 50 years ago for a suede jacket.
No, I'm sure.
So then Dominic went back, say, "Hey, Jim, you know what? We got to get a better price. Let me find out." He goes to the phone, comes back. He went from 60,000 to 72,000 in 10 minutes. He
Wow.
raised the price 20%. So we
Yeah.
got 72,000. We picked up about, I don't know, maybe 20, 24,000 each. That's how quick we made money. We didn't have to do anything. We didn't touch the merchandise. Everybody got a bunch of coats. We all grabbed 10, 12 different coats, took them back home, gave them to the wives, gave them to the girlfriends or whatever. But Jimmy was quick. He would settle the whole thing up in a few hours, man. And by the end of that night, that merchandise was gone. He'd pay for the rental of the building. He did everything. He was the negotiator, and he knew all the buyers. He was slick as there wasn't anybody better than Jimmy Burke when it came to the whole system of hijacking in New York.
Yeah. I mean, from what I understand, is that's what he really groomed into. After he got out of prison, he got, like I said, he was with the Vario crew. He started doing selling cigarettes, and I mean, just in between, just really focusing on a lot of the hijacking, though, and
Yeah.
capturing these warehouses. So
Mhm.
wherever he made his connections in between there, I mean, he was pretty on a solid
You
ground.
got to understand that when you're hijacking and robbing with guns and all, that's crime. But when we thought about things like bookmaking, stolen merchandise, to us, that wasn't even crime. That was like everyday business. And if you went to Robert's Lounge down in the basement, there'd always be stolen merchandise laying around. And then he would distribute it, because some of that stuff he would keep and sell it like on the street and get even twice the money he was getting from the big buyers, because the big buyers would lay out 50 or 100,000 and get, peanuts for each piece. But yet when you sold them out, in the street, you might get $20, $30 an item, $40. So he had a bunch of hang around guys, like a bunch of lackeys that would sell merchandise for him.
Yeah, I guess
And
that would make
he
sense.
had the cigarette business. He had a Shylock business. He had a bookmaking business. You name it. Jimmy was in every type of crime you could imagine.
Yeah, and I mean, to get to these certain connections, I mean, he had to, cross the line with different people and take some out, I'm sure. And I mean, even with the warehouse thing. So
Yeah.
I recall from Henry's book that he talked about Tommy DeSimone, was asked by Jimmy, "There's a guy over there that won't, please go make him reconsider letting us put our merchandise or stolen stuff here and we'll pay him off." Well,
Right.
Tommy ended up beating him up to death. He ended up killing him or shooting him, I believe.
Yeah.
And that was in his book, but I don't think it was ever portrayed in the movie Goodfellas. But
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, some of these people, these everyday people, lost their life because of,
Yeah.
just telling him no, and it's what
So
he
that
did.
was basically my first couple of years with Jimmy,
Mhm.
and I did meet Mickey at the same time when I went to prison in the summer of '74. My then wife ran an Italian deli. And so Jimmy had all the contacts and the payoffs to pay off prison guards. So then we were in the joint, we were in the prison, and Jimmy said, listen, how about Mickey, his wife, going to meet your wife at the deli and getting a box of stuff that we could smuggle in, like imported salami, pepperoni. Jimmy loved scotch, and Paulie Vario loved scotch. So my wife would get a little box, maybe about the twice the size of a shoebox, and then Mickey would come there, pick it up, and then she would take it and meet one of the prison guards and give it to the prison guard. This was like in 1975. We had been in the federal house of detention, and Jimmy had made a contact with a guy. I'll never forget his name. His name was Dale Thomas, and
Mhm.
at that time he was like the captain of the guards. He later became a warden, and Jimmy was paying him off to sneak this stuff in so we could have all the luxuries of, Italian delicacies, cold cuts, cigars, scotch for Paulie. And that's how that worked, and Mickey she was a tough woman. She was, a gangster's wife. I mean, she did everything that Jimmy told her to do. And of course, when I was in lockup with Jimmy, uh, I met him in the new house, the new house, excuse me, new house of detention, and Tommy had come in there. This was in the summer of '75. Tommy had been in Atlanta, and Jimmy had been in Atlanta, and I had been in Lewisburg. But then we were back in New York because we were going back for other cases that were pending. I was appealing my case, my bank robbery case. And as I was there, Jimmy said, there's an attorney, Jewish guy named Jerry Shagel, one of the sharpest minds. You need to get him to represent you. And this was in '74, '75. Okay, so I had my wife go meet the guy and had to give him like a retainer. It was cash in those days. This was '74. This is 12 years before John Gotti even knew Jerry Shagel, because Shagel wound up representing Gotti in the first RICO trial, which Sammy Gravano fixed. So Shagel got me a hearing on my conviction, and we negotiated a probation out of my 8-year sentence. First, I got 25 years, then I got 8 years, a first offender. And so I was released in the summer of '75. While I was in that holding facility, the brand new Park Row Federal House of Detention. So while we were there for a few months, I was close with Dave Iacofetti, the Gambino guy. And I said, you want to be my partner? We could play pinochle against Jimmy and Tommy. And a lot of times the guys didn't gamble for money. The gamble was for push-ups. So we would play pinochle, and Jimmy was brilliant, man. He could just about tell you what was left when the last 8 or 10 cards are going to be played, what was left in your hand. And Tommy was lame. He didn't have a mind for poker. So Jimmy would be quietly admonishing him, Tommy, you're not paying attention. So, so Dave Iacofetti and I would win. We would rarely lose. And Dave was a, portly, chunky guy in those days in his 50s. So if we did lose, I'd do the push-ups for both of us, because you'd have to do like 50 push-ups each. Well, Jimmy happened to be athletic in a way, and then Tommy couldn't do a push-up. So Jimmy would do the push-ups every time they lost. And of course, at the time, being in that cell block, I really did want to choke Tommy to death. It was after he killed Foxy, but Dave Iacofetti talked me out of it. He said, don't do it. You never killed anybody. Once you pull the trigger, you can't take it back. He's going to get what he deserves. He had predicted in '75 Tommy was going to get what he deserved for killing Foxy and killing a whole bunch of other guys.
Didn't
So I got
Jimmy?
out. I got out of that federal holding facility, and that new facility didn't have any bars on the windows. It was glass. And we were on the 7th floor, and they were by the glass, and I went outside in front, and I was waving to them. And I left everything in my room to Tommy. Whatever I had, personal stuff, whatever it was. You always have, like you got sort of toothpaste or whatever, and you just leave it to the next guy that's there. Because I got released, sort of spontaneously. I didn't know I was going to get released. Went to court, got a hearing, and got probation. And then after that, I went home, and of course, I didn't have a partner to hijack trucks anymore or rob banks. I immediately went into the drug business. That was it. That was in the summer of 75. I also went into the car business. So by 76, 77, I had a stolen car operation, a chop shop. I had several buildings in Brooklyn, one in Queens. And then in 78, Tommy came to see me at my Corvette shop and said, hey, we may be doing a score in a few weeks. This was like October. He was in the halfway house with Jimmy. They were getting ready to get released. And then they came to see me one day. And then Jimmy says, hey, my kid, he was 18 years old, Frankie Burke. My kid is a good car thief. Could you give him work? I go, yeah, sure. So the kid, Frankie, came to see me. And I'd tell him, okay, this week I need, 3 Monte Carlos. I need 2 Pontiacs. He was a really good car thief, and I'd pay him a little bit more than I paid the rest. Of course, at the same time, I had the Goldie guy working from Joe Messina's crew. I had a half a dozen car thieves. One of them was called what was his name again? It was Carmine Agnello, who wound up marrying Gotti's daughter. He was a car thief. And Peter Zaccaro and Andrew Curro, who was a murderer. So these guys were starting out. They were all 18, 19, 20 years old. They were car thieves. And this was in 1977, 78. And when Jimmy got out, I did see him. But I backed away from everybody because I had the car business. And also, I was dealing drugs. It was sort of a secret part of my life, the drug business, Yeah. And before I knew it, Tommy came to see me, needed some money. He wanted me to spot him some money. He knew I had a Sherlock business. But he had some gold, and I bought the gold off him. That was probably October, November. And before I knew it, then the Lufthansa heist made the news. And I knew they did it because he had told me all about it before he even did it. And he said Jimmy had made a connection for, the returning of American currency from Germany. And that's what the American currency gets to Europe, and it gets worn, and they have to return it back to the U.S. And then they send them new currency. So I knew they did the heist, but oh my gosh, never thinking that the whole neighborhood was going to be flooded with FBI agents.
No, I wouldn't imagine so. Did Jimmy ever hint or bring it up to you about this Lufthansa heist after
he
they
was
did
a
it?
very, very careful, closed-mouthed guy. If you did a piece of work with him, a heist or something, you would definitely get to talk to him about it, okay? But he wouldn't be talking about stuff that he did without you. That wasn't his way.
Yeah, he would keep it between the two of you.
Yeah, everything was sort of secretive, and I sort of backed away from those guys at that point. That was like Christmas time of 78. It wasn't a few weeks later that the word was out in the street that Tommy was gone. And that was it. I mean, I didn't see Jimmy anymore after that. Heard a lot of the rumblings about the guys that were getting whacked out. They were finding guys all over the place. Well, just about the way Scorsese did the movie. I guess that's the way it turned out. I stayed away from that whole group.
Well, I'll talk about what I researched then, about this whole Lufthansa heist.
Yeah.
So from Henry's book, he talked about, the guy named Lou that was the only one that was convicted for the Lufthansa heist, the worker.
Werner, I think, yeah.
Yeah. He had told, I believe a bookmaker named Marty about the failed security system at the airport. Then Marty took the information to Henry Hill, and he told him, hey, we need, he said, we need a team to do this. So the crew was Jimmy Burke, Tommy DeSimone, Frenchie McMahon, Joe Manry, I believe, and they were a part of this whole operation, the scheme that was going to go down, at the Lufthansa heist. So Parnell Edwards was supposed to be the guy to dispose of the cargo van after, and then Jimmy's son Frankie Burke would be the crash car. He was just gonna do that. So after that, they went in there. They pointed the guns at the supervisor. They told him to open up the vault. The men formed a line from the door to the van, and they put the boxes inside. Took all of them. It took about 32 minutes, or 30 minutes is what they had said, and they took about 72 boxes of cash and jewelry. And then the van, they drove off, and it was the biggest heist in history, is what they said about it. But I mean, after that, a lot of the guys, they ended up getting killed. So this is where we'll talk more about Jimmy becoming a hitman, or a serial killer. Essentially, I mean, he had paid all of the other people that were involved with this, helping the heist happen, but they felt cheated because they once they seen the stuff on the news about how much was really stolen, they're like, yeah, hey man, we want some more for what we did. And so
Yeah.
Jimmy, he realized he was starting to be watched by the feds. And then even on top of that, they had fingerprints from that van because Parnell Edwards didn't dispose of it like he was supposed to. So Jimmy had Tommy kill him, and then Jimmy had the man that brought the heist to him, the guy named Marty. They had him taken out, and then Tommy bought drugs to sell him with his money that he made as well. I mean, that's what I kind of got from it. But I mean,
Yeah.
what were your thoughts on the people that were taken out?
I was completely, away from that whole crew by that time, 78. I was totally dealing drugs. I had bought real estate. I had a Shylock business. I just opened up a jewelry store. So I was so busy. I wasn't interested in guns anymore. I wasn't interested in robbery anymore because I could make more in a week, selling heroin than I could waiting to pull off a heist. And there wasn't anybody for me to pull off heists with anymore. I wasn't going to take any chances with any of the younger guys. So,
But I mean, like when you saw it, like the movie, or years after. I mean, what were your thoughts when you seen that? I mean,
well, I had already been in Hollywood for a few years. I realized how embellished the story was. It was also, in my eyes, um, I think the characters were twisted in my mind because Jimmy was the brains of that whole outfit. I mean, Tommy was a near moron. Okay. Henry was the drug user. Henry wasn't as sharp as you think he was. It was Jimmy that was the brains behind that whole crew. And so De Niro played Burke, but I thought they downplayed his sharpness, his streetwise, personality and how witty he was. He was very witty. And I think De Niro played him serious because, they wanted to really paint the picture of Henry by Ray Liotta as funny, humorous. And then, the Joe Pesci rendition of Tommy was off, because Tommy was 6 foot something, Pesci was 5'6". I just didn't see it as real. I mean, if the people that watched the movie didn't know anything about these characters, they totally enjoyed it and they thought that's who they were.
And me, when I watched it, my dad showed me that movie when I was young. So I just, I was like, whatever, that's probably what it was. I mean, I didn't really look too much into it, but now,
Right.
watching it a fucking week ago, I'm like, oh my god, Joe Pesci was, decent.
Yeah.
Tommy DeSimone so small.
Yeah.
It was like, how does this even add up? But you know what?
Yeah.
He did a funny job doing it and stuff because like the funniest part was when Joe Pesci, he was he was like telling a story, and Henry and all of them, they were all laughing, and he was fucking with Henry at towards the end. He's like, what the fuck, why do you think I'm so funny?
Yeah.
Am I here to fucking amuse you? And
Amuse you. Yeah.
he just goes on and on and on. He just keeps fucking with them, and that is hilarious, man.
But
No,
Tommy did have a spontaneous, witty, comedic side to him. In probably 73, I had started racing go-karts with a brother-in-law of mine who was like 13, 14 years old. And I had two go-karts, in the garage behind the house. And Tommy and Foxy came out and said, "Hey, let's go ride the go-karts in the middle of the night." So we took them to the park a block away, and they were riding around, waking up the whole neighborhood. So yeah, they did have a whimsical side to them, and they became fast buddies. I think everything was good until Foxy realized that, Tommy wanted to be involved with his sister. And I wasn't really privileged to understand that whole thing because I went to federal prison in July of 74, and then Foxy was murdered in December of 74. So I wasn't around for that summer or that fall, what really took place. I wasn't there.
Yeah, and I mean, even after Tommy's death as well, he well, let's talk about his death because Jimmy Burke, when he found out the news, I'll explain to you what Henry said in his book, but he said that Tommy was supposed to be made, become a made man, but he never did. So Jimmy was really excited about this. He was happy because Jimmy himself could not become a made man, because he was Irish.
Right.
So, and I mean, after that though, they were once he found out that news. I mean, he called back home whoever was supposed to be making him, and they said, you know what, we had to take him out. And so Tommy was, Jimmy was pretty pissed off. I mean, he just started beating the hell out of the phone booth, and just start crying. And Henry came up to him. He said, "What's wrong?" And basically Jimmy just said, they took him out. And he's gone. They didn't make him. They killed him. And I mean, like you said, you believe it was the Gotti crew that did it because of what they told you, and some people believe it was the Lucchese family taking care of their business, which I don't know. I mean, maybe they worked together to make it happen.
Yeah, I think the way I felt about it was I had been given advance notice by Angelo. Don't worry about that guy, Tommy. John said, don't touch him. Angelo told me, don't touch him. Ubats, when you get out, don't touch him. Okay? Because you see, I got released in September of 75. And then Tommy was still in jail. And he had to be in jail for at least a couple of more years. Well, he didn't get out. He didn't get to the halfway house until 78. So he was in prison all that time. Also, Gotti was in prison at the same time doing that couple of years for the McBratney murder.
Mm-hmm.
And when I got out in the fall of 75, I immediately went into the car business and drug business. Well, that kept me away from the whole Bergen crew. Occasionally, I would go to the Bergen crew. And then Gotti got out in 77. And occasionally I'd see the guys because I was doing business with the Caniglias in that time in 77, 78, the whole stolen car business thing.
Yeah, and another thing I wanted to bring up too was we had recently did that show with OC Shorts, and he had brought up you going on or you talking with Henry, and Henry writing in his book that for a fact that that John Gotti was the one that killed Tommy DeSimone. And so I mean, what are your thoughts on all that then? With
Well,
Henry?
when Angelo gave me that, sort of quiet order, don't touch him. John said, don't touch him. So I realized that, John had made a decision. He was going to get him. And if Gotti had made a decision about something, he was pretty ironclad about it. He wasn't a guy that waffled. He did not waffle on stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So eventually, maybe, they had it figured out. Okay, they did this heist, and now's the time to take him out. Whether or not they got some of Tommy's money, I don't know.
Yeah, who knows, man? What happened with all that money? Well,
Yeah.
to talk about Jimmy's downfall, Henry Hill was like a big key factor in that. I mean, Henry Hill had flipped; he became an informant, and
Right.
he he was facing 20 years in prison because he had got busted with drugs.
Right.
And so Jimmy continued to want to know about when Henry was getting out. He wanted to meet with him. He wanted to continue to have these conversations and just really get a feel for where Henry was at mentally. And so he had asked him to take care of a piece. Jimmy had asked Henry to take care of a piece of work in Florida about a supposed witness that was cooperating with the government. And he was told Jimmy wanted him to go there with another guy in their crew. And, Henry just didn't feel right about it. He felt like they were going to take him out there. and kill him. So he ended up testifying against Jimmy, and they couldn't convict him for anything else except the point shaving scam, which was they were fixing college basketball
Well,
games. And
that happened by accident, by the way.
oh, really? Expand
Well,
on it.
Ed McDonald, the guy that was the prosecutor, in Brooklyn, and I had met him when I first got out, and when I decided to cooperate with the government, I had met him in 1984, and by the time I testified at the Gotti trial, he was the prosecutor who was standing before the judge with me for me to get sentenced. In 1987, I was sentenced to 5-year probation. So I had a conversation with Ed McDonald, who was a known prosecutor at that time. I go, Ed, you know what? I know you might have heard this before, but I'm never going to go back to crime. I'm in the program. I got 2 of my kids. They're in college. Everything is good. And I said, I'll stay in touch with you. That was like 1987, 88. Well, on occasion, the FBI agent that I worked undercover with, who knew McDonald, would talk to McDonald and say, oh, yeah, Ubats, Sally Ubats, he's doing good, man. The guy is in this business, that business. I was in the silk screening business. I was making hats, shirts. I did all kinds of stuff, after I got into the program. But I stayed in touch with McDonald. And then finally I went back for some reason in New York. Oh, years later, I went back. We were shooting exteriors for the Sinatra movie. And I had dinner with him. And I said, So tell me, what sticks in your mind about the old life? Because this was like 2009. And I was always a big sports fan. And he told me specifically, I was sitting there listening to Henry talking about all kinds of things he did. They were debriefing. And Henry casually said, yeah, I was involved with this guy in Pittsburgh, and he had information, and he knew one of the basketball players at BC, at Boston College. And then McDonald looked at him and said, hey, I graduated from Boston College. What are you talking about? And that's when Henry accidentally or, sort of spontaneously told him, we fixed a couple of basketball games. McDonald went crazy because he was a BC graduate. And that's how he got the information. It wasn't that Henry sat there and said, oh, I did this, I did that. It came out accidentally. And that, there was a lot of exposure about the BC point shaving case, and McDonald was involved in it.
I remember that from Henry's book. I mean, it's like,
Yeah.
it maybe wouldn't have been a big deal to, someone else listening to him. But I mean, for McDonald, when he heard that, he's probably like, what the hell? Because he's pretty upset about it. So they went full force, and they were able to convict Jimmy of also killing that Richard Eden as well. And so he ended up getting, he ended up dying in prison. He served the rest of his life in prison. And again, he's another guy that got cancer. Remember, you talk about these guys.
I kept talking about the murderers. They all wind up getting cancer. But McDonald and I became friendly. I'd call him all the time. And then by 2009, I called him. I said, I'm sending you a screenplay. I want you to play a priest. A priest? He goes, yeah, I need an Irish priest in the movie Sinatra. I wrote it. He said, are you really going to make? Yeah, I'm going to make the movie. We don't have any money. It's not like Goodfellas where they had millions of dollars. We're making this money on chump change. And he flew out. We gave him a nice setup, got him a nice hotel, and treated him good. And he enjoyed a week. He was there about a week, and he played the priest in the Sinatra Club. It was fun. It's kind of fun.
Yeah, no, that is pretty interesting. But I mean, that pretty much covers, the whole Jimmy Burke story from your perspective and stuff. All right, Sal. So that pretty much covers, the rest of Jimmy Burke. But we do have another story that will go on Patreon and talk about. So all of our Patreon subscribers, go over there when you see it. Go over there and check out that video, because it'll be the follow up on what we talked about today, Jimmy Burke. So that's another reason why people should subscribe to our Patreon channel. They get the full episodes of each podcast. Then we got exclusive untold stories about Sal's life in the Mafia and the mobsters he was around. And we also offer, behind the scene content like the story that's going to continue on. and you can chat back and forth with Sal personally and ask him any questions you want and be a part of an exclusive community of Mafia story lovers. And, of course, when we do the lives on our YouTube channel, we make sure to make our Patreon subscribers' questions priority. So thank you, everyone, for watching. Sal, you got anything you want to leave the people with?
No, I just think when they look at the movie, they realize, I mean, the movie Goodfellas, this is a movie, and Scorsese, painted it the way he thought he could paint those characters. There's always a little sense of humor in and around crime, and I think he got that across with the Pesci rendition of Tommy. But of course, I don't know. I was too close to it. I always thought, wow, that wasn't the way it was. If I was going to do a movie about Jimmy Burke, I'd paint a picture of a guy who really had a terrible childhood, had a lot of departure. He had a lot of, negative things happen to him, and he's a survivor. And, he's sort of like the old school. I mean, he was born in the 30s. So by the time the 50s came, he was deeply involved in organized crime. And I'm sure, he looked up to the young Paul Vario in the 50s and 60s, and a bunch of made guys that he had to respect. That was the old school. So I thought that the movie was okay. They call it the best mob movie. Okay, that's what some people think. I don't think that. But, I think... and people don't realize when that movie came out in 1990, it didn't even do a big gross business. Mob movies don't make a lot of money except for The Godfather.
Yeah.
So it's how they paint the picture, how they paint the story, And I mean, Scorsese did the best he could. Don't forget, he had to use the information from the Nick Pileggi book, Wise Guy, which was a giant bestseller, in the country, because Henry was one of the first to talk about inside the life.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's become pop culture. And of course, I never thought I'd be sitting here talking about it.
Yeah, well, times have changed, man. People enjoy it. They love hearing the stories and stuff. But, on that note, we're going to switch over to Patreon now, and we're going to go talk about another story about Jimmy. So thank you again for everyone watching, and we'll see you on Patreon. That wraps up the fifth hitman Sal was close to, Jimmy Burke. Sal really experienced Jimmy changing over the years. That's what makes our show so different. Sal was actually there. He was around all these high-ranking guys. That's what separates us from all the documents and stuff that's out there, feds reports and everything else. I mean, Sal's an insider. Please share this video with anyone that you think will enjoy this type of content. Please comment any key takeaways that you got from this. We've been getting a lot of comments, and we love them. We love answering them, getting back to people, and answering whatever questions they got. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel as well if you want to continue to get videos from me and Sal. Also, if you want to join our Patreon channel, you can get exclusive content on there. You can get videos that we can't have on YouTube because YouTube might take them down. You can also chat back and forth with Sal. Sal also writes little few paragraph stories about guys that he knew in that life as well. So it's just a really exclusive community of people that enjoy this type of content. If you want to get an autographed copy of Sal's book, it'll be in the video description below as well. If you want to get the Sinatra Club playing cards, they're on there. They were played in Sal's Sinatra Club by John Gotti and even Jimmy Burke, the guy that we talked about today. If you want to support me, my clothing brand's on there as well. If you want to watch all of mine and Sal's old podcasts, please click the playlist that pops up called A Lifetime of Mafia Tales. Thank you again, and we'll see you on the next one.